My name is Charlene. I'm standing in my childhood living room, surrounded by my family, but the atmosphere is tense and heavy. The "Congratulations, Ryan" banner hanging over the fireplace now seems like a cruel mockery. 4 FBI agents are here, and they're about to arrest my brother, Ryan. Just a moment ago, I was sitting across from Ryan, trying to make him understand the gravity of what he'd done. He thought he was helping me, but in reality, he'd committed serious federal crimes. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in the Thompson family, the youngest of 2 children. My brother, Ryan, who is 5 years older than me, was always the apple of my parents' eyes. They were overprotective and indulgent towards him, while I was often overlooked. When Ryan graduated high school with mediocre grades, my parents threw him a big party. But when I graduated as valedictorian 3 years later, they simply said congratulations and then went on to talk about Ryan's latest job interviews. At 28, I managed to buy my first house. It was a small, 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. I'd saved every penny from my job at the Federal Financial Crime Unit. I worked extra shifts and lived frugally to make the down payment. When I called to tell my family the news, my mom sounded skeptical. "Are you sure you can handle the mortgage payments? It's a big responsibility for someone your age." Ryan laughed in the background. "She can barely afford to fill up her car. This is going to end badly." My dad then took the phone and said, "Honey, maybe you should have consulted us first. What if something goes wrong?" I hung up, feeling deflated. Over the next few years, my house became a constant topic of conversation at family gatherings. Ryan loved to make jokes about my mortgage chains and how I was tied down. He'd say, "Smart people rent. Flexibility is key. Charlene is stuck with that house whether she likes it or not." I learned to ignore his comments and just smile and change the subject. Meanwhile, Ryan bounced from one job to another and moved from one apartment to another, always asking our parents for money to pay his rent or security deposits. But my parents saw his instability as him exploring his options, while my stable homeownership was seen as a limitation. Last year, I was offered a 6-month temporary assignment overseas. It was a high-profile case involving international money laundering and terrorism funding. The details were classified, and the work was intense. Before I left, I made all the necessary arrangements for my house. I set up automatic payments for utilities, hired a lawn care service, and installed a state-of-the-art security system. I also gave my parents emergency contact information and a spare key, explaining, "This is only for real emergencies, like a burst pipe or a break-in. Otherwise, the house should be fine on its own." Ryan rolled his eyes and said, "Look at her, treating that little house like it's a national treasure. It's just a regular suburban house that she can't really afford." My mom sighed in agreement. The work overseas was all-consuming. I was deep in financial investigations, tracking complex networks that spanned multiple countries. Communication with home was limited due to security protocols. I managed to check in with my family a few times, and each time, they assured me that everything was okay. Ryan even joked, "The house is still standing. No disasters yet." The assignment was supposed to end in June, but complications arose, and I had to stay for an extra month. I sent a message to my family explaining the extension, and my dad replied, "Take all the time you need. We're taking care of things here." However, what I didn't know was that Ryan had been watching my house for months. He noticed that I never came back, and he convinced himself that I was in over my head, probably struggling financially and too proud to admit it. The first sign of trouble came during my last week overseas. My supervisor, Agent Thompson, pulled me aside and showed me a classified report. "There's been some activity at your registered address. It's flagged as suspicious in our monitoring systems." My blood ran cold. "What kind of activity?" I asked. "A property transaction. Someone filed paperwork claiming ownership transfer," he said. It might be nothing, but given your security clearance and current assignment, we need to investigate. I was in shock. That's impossible. I own that house. There's no transaction. Agent Thompson explained that real estate fraud was sometimes used to compromise federal employees, and they were treating it as a potential threat. The flight home was a nightmare. I couldn't contact my family due to security reasons, and I had no idea what had happened to my house. When I landed, I drove straight home. The house looked normal from the outside, but there was a lockbox on the front door and a sold sign on the lawn. My key didn't work. With a shaking hand, I called the number on the real estate sign. A cheerful voice answered, "Thompson Property Services." I said, "This is Charlene Thompson. Someone put a sold sign on my house, and I need to know what's going on." There was a pause, and then the voice said, "Oh, you must be the sister. Ryan told us you might call. He said you'd been having trouble with the payments and finally agreed to let him handle the sale. Congratulations on getting out of that mortgage." My stomach dropped. Ryan Thompson is my brother, and he doesn't own this house. I do. The person on the phone replied, "Ma'am, I have all the paperwork here." Ryan presented power of attorney documents and a deed showing his ownership. He said you were overseas and couldn't handle the transaction yourself. The sale closed last week. I hung up and immediately called my parents' house. My mom answered, "Charlene, you're back. How was your trip?" I was frantic. "Where's Ryan? I need to talk to him right now." She said, "He's here. We're having a little celebration. Ryan made such a smart business decision, and we're so proud of him." I demanded, "Put him on the phone now." Ryan's voice came through, cocky and amused. "Hey, sis. Welcome back to reality." I shouted, "What did you do to my house?" He replied, "I solved your problem. You were clearly in over your head, gone for months, probably behind on payments. I found a buyer, handled the paperwork, and got you out of that financial mess. You should be thanking me." I was fuming. "That wasn't your house to sell." My dad's voice cut in on the speakerphone. "Ryan showed us all the financial documents. You were 3 months behind on payments. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. Ryan saved your credit rating." I felt like I was losing my mind. "That's impossible. All my payments are automatic. I haven't missed a single payment in 3 years. Ryan said smugly, "The bank records don't lie." "Look, I know this is embarrassing, but I handled it quietly. The buyer was willing to take over the debt and pay you $15,000 after all the fees." I asked, "Where's my $15,000? He said, "I deposited it in your account, minus the money you owed me for handling everything. But the point is, you're free now. No more house payments you couldn't afford." I was hyperventilating. "Ryan, I need you to listen carefully. I never missed a payment. I never gave you permission to sell my house. And I never signed any power of attorney." My mom interjected gently, "Charlene, we have your signature on all the documents. Maybe the stress of your job overseas affected your memory." That's when I realized what had happened. Ryan had forged my signature, using documents he'd seen over the years. He'd somehow convinced a real estate agent and a title company that he had the right to sell my house. And my family believed his story about missed payments. But what Ryan didn't know was that due to my security clearance and the sensitive nature of my work, my house was registered with federal authorities. Any unauthorized transaction would trigger an immediate investigation. I drove to my childhood home in a daze. When I walked in, Ryan was holding court in my dad's recliner, telling the story of how he'd rescued me from financial disaster. He said, "The best part is that she doesn't have to worry about property taxes or maintenance anymore." I basically gave her back her freedom. My mom hugged me tightly. "We're so proud of Ryan for looking out for you." I sat down across from Ryan and said, "Tell me exactly what happened." He began, clearly enjoying the attention. I noticed you never came back to check on the house. Neighbors said they hadn't seen you in months. I drove by, and the lawn was overgrown, and mail was piling up. So I did some digging. I called the mortgage company pretending to be worried about my sister, and they confirmed you were 3 months behind on payments. Then I went to the bank, and they said foreclosure proceedings had started, and the property would go to auction in 60 days. That's when I knew I had to step in. I asked, "How did you get the legal right to sell?" He pulled out a folder of documents. Power of attorney. You signed it the day before you left for your mysterious job. He handed me a document with my signature at the bottom. The signature looked perfect, too perfect. I knew Ryan had always been good at forgery, using it in high school to sign his own report cards. I said quietly, "I don't remember signing this." He said confidently, "You signed it because you were worried about leaving the house. You said it was in case of emergencies." The family members around the room nodded sympathetically. He continued, "The buyer was a nice young couple, first-time homeowners. They were pre-approved for the full amount and were willing to close quickly. I handled all the paperwork, including title transfer and mortgage payoff. I even saved you thousands in commission by finding the buyers myself." He announced dramatically, "I sold your little house for $300,000. The family burst into applause. Just then, my phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Thompson. "Need immediate debrief. Federal crime reported at your address. Are you secure?" I typed back, "Secure. Family gathering. We'll call within an hour." My dad noticed my phone and asked, "Everything okay?" I said calmly, "Just work." I then asked Ryan, "Can you tell me the buyers' names? I want to send them a welcome card." He said, "David and Michelle Harris. They're so excited about their first house." My phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. I answered, "Hello?" A panicked voice said, "Is this Charlene Thompson?" "This is Mark Johnson from Johnson & Associates Law Firm. We represented the Harris family in the purchase of your property. Why are FBI agents at our office?" "They have a warrant for all documents related to the sale. They're saying the transaction was fraudulent and involves national security violations." I walked into the kitchen for privacy and said quietly, "Mr. Johnson, I never authorized the sale of my house. My brother forged my signature and illegally transferred federal property." He was shocked. "But he had power of attorney documents with your signature." I replied, "Those documents are forged. And my property is registered with federal authorities due to my security clearance. Any unauthorized transaction triggers an automatic investigation." I could hear papers rustling on the other end. He said, "Oh, God. The FBI agents are asking about wire fraud, identity theft, and federal property protection statutes. We accepted the power of attorney documents in good faith. Your brother seemed legitimate, and the signature looked authentic." I asked, "Are the Harris family in your office right now?" He said, "Yes, they're here trying to understand what's going on." I said, "Tell them I'm very sorry, but they were victims of fraud. The sale was illegal, and they need to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. The FBI will handle the financial recovery process." I hung up and walked back to the living room. Ryan asked, "Who was that?" I said calmly, "The buyer's lawyer." He asked, "Everything okay?" "No problems with the closing, I hope." I looked at him and said, "Ryan, I need you to understand something very important. My house wasn't just any property. Due to my job and security clearance, it's registered with federal authorities. Any unauthorized transaction triggers an automatic investigation." He laughed. "Come on, Charlene. It's just a regular house in a regular neighborhood. Don't be so dramatic." I said quietly, "The FBI is currently confiscating all documents related to the sale. They're treating this as wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. The room went silent. My dad said after a moment, "Ryan was helping you out of a bad situation." I said, "There was no bad situation. I never missed a payment. I never signed a power of attorney. And I never gave anyone permission to sell my house." Ryan's confidence started to crack. "But the bank confirmed you were behind on payments." I asked, "Did you actually speak to my mortgage company or did you call a different number?" His face went pale. "I called the number I found online." I asked, "What name did you give them?" He said, "I said I was Ryan Thompson, your brother, and I was concerned about your property." I nodded slowly. "And they gave you detailed financial information about my mortgage over the phone based on nothing more than sharing my last name?" The family members started to look confused. I continued, "The signature on the power of attorney. Can you tell me when and where I supposedly signed it?" He said, "The day before you left. In your kitchen." I said, "Ryan, I left from the airport directly from my office. I never went home that day. And I certainly never signed any legal documents giving you control of my property." Just then, my phone rang. It was Agent Thompson. I stepped onto the back porch and answered, "This is Charlene Thompson." He said, "Agent Thompson, we need you to come in immediately. We've got a federal crime scene at your property address, and we need your full debrief on the security implications. Your brother committed wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. The buyers are victims, the real estate professionals are potential accomplices, and your family property is now evidence in a federal investigation. We're executing arrest warrants within the hour. Can you keep him at your current location?" I said, "He doesn't know he's committed a crime. He thinks he was helping me." He replied, "Agent Thompson, his intentions are irrelevant to the charges. His actions are serious federal crimes." I hung up and walked back inside. The mood in the living room had changed. Ryan was frantically looking through his folder of documents, and my parents were asking questions he couldn't answer. My mom said, "Charlene, Ryan says the mortgage company told him you were behind on payments, but he can't remember exactly who he spoke to or when." My dad added, "And the power of attorney. Ryan says you signed it in your kitchen, but you said you left from your office." Ryan was sweating. "Look, maybe I'm remembering some details wrong, but the important thing is I helped Charlene get out of a bad situation." I asked gently, "What bad situation?" "My mortgage payments were automatic and current. I never asked for help, and I certainly never signed any documents giving you legal control of my property." He started to say, "But the foreclosure notices." I interrupted, "What foreclosure notices?" I had mail forwarding set up before I left. All my mail was being sent to a secure federal facility. There was no mail in my mailbox. The room was silent except for the sound of Ryan's papers rustling. My mom said hopefully, maybe there was some confusion. Maybe Ryan misunderstood the situation, but he was trying to help. I said carefully, "The problem is that Ryan forged my signature on legal documents and illegally sold federal property. Even if his intentions were good, those are serious federal crimes." Ryan stood up suddenly. "This is insane. It's just a house. There's nothing federal about it." I explained, "My security clearance requires registration of my primary residence with federal authorities. Any unauthorized transaction triggers automatic investigation." My dad asked, "Security clearance for what? You said you worked in administrative oversight." I looked around the room at my family's confused faces and said, "I work in financial crimes investigation, dealing with international money laundering, terrorism funding, and organized crime networks. My property is monitored as part of national security protocols." Ryan sat down hard. "You're serious?" I said, "The buyer's lawyer just called because FBI agents are confiscating all closing documents. The buyers spent their life savings on a house they can't legally own because the sale was fraudulent." He said weakly, but I have power of attorney. I said, you forged power of attorney. The signature's fake, Ryan. We both know you've always been good at copying signatures. My phone buzzed with another secure message. Federal agents en route. 10 minutes. I looked at Ryan, who was starting to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. I said, Ryan, federal agents are going to be here very soon. They're going to arrest you for wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. You need to cooperate fully and get a lawyer immediately. My mom gasped. Arrest? But he was trying to help. I said, Mom, Ryan forged my signature and illegally sold my house. The fact that he thought he was helping doesn't change the crimes he committed. Ryan was staring at the documents in his folder. I didn't mean for this to happen, he whispered. I said gently, I know, but it did happen. You stole a $300,000 asset and sold it without permission. That's a federal crime regardless of your intentions. Just then, car doors slammed outside. 4 FBI agents entered the living room. Agent Thompson nodded at me professionally and said, Agent Thompson, is this the subject? I looked at Ryan, who had gone completely pale, and said, This is my brother, Ryan Thompson. He's the one who forged the documents and executed the illegal property transfer. Agent Thompson announced, Ryan Thompson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and illegal transfer of federal property. The handcuffs clicked shut around Ryan's wrists as the agents read him his rights. My parents were crying.